Good day, folks. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mark Antelli. I'm Vice President and Head of Global Delivery for Toll Plus. Today we have a very exciting webinar, very timely as well, the evolution of ransomware delivery and new strategies to minimize risk. Today's headlines are full of ransomware attacks. So this is a very timely webinar, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. I'm sure you will. Our presenter today is Joe Carlock. He's a lead data center and security architect for Leapfrog Services. Leapfrog Services is an IT managed service company and has not only done some work for me in previous projects. They are coming off of some recent ransomware attacks for some of their other clients. So they have fresh information, let's say, coming off of that. What we like to do is, through the slides a little bit. Joe has more than 15 years of experience in architecting and securing infrastructure in the financial services and in the tolling and transportation arena as well. As I mentioned, he did work. Leapfrog has done some work for us. His exposure is a wide range of business verticals and horizontals, which has allowed him to garner a breadth and depth of knowledge in the IT arena, as well as the IT security and network security environments. But before we begin, let's just go through a couple logistics. The webinar will last about 60 minutes. Everybody will be on listen and view only mode. We are recording the webinar and will be posted on the IBTTA website and to the IBTTA YouTube page. If you look down on your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A icon down there. This is where we will capture. This is where we will capture questions and answers throughout the session. So as you have them, please put them into the Q&A, and we will answer them at the end. We'll go through and figure out the ones that we can answer very quickly. Then finally, at the end of the webinar, you're going to be directed to a survey. Please take the time and conduct a survey. This helps us improve our webinars, and it helps us get some feedback on what else you would like to hear from not only IBTTA, but the Council of Platinum Sponsors, and in this cybersecurity subcommittee of COPS. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe so I don't take up too much of his time. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks everybody else for joining. We have quite a bit to go through today, but I do want to start by saying we at Leapfrog, take security very, very seriously. So as Mark said, one piece of clarification is most of the ransomware that we deal with are coming in as non-clients. So I have a unique role within Leapfrog, whereas if we receive a call from a non-client that says we have been attacked, we've had an issue, we don't have access to our environment, they will bring me in to work with their team and our SOC in order to bring them back from what I would say the dead. So with all of that said, we're going to be discussing how ransomware has changed over time. So it's obviously nothing new for anybody to see this in the news. The city of Atlanta was hit. Many organizations have been hit. You probably know somebody, if not your own organizations, that have had issues with this. What we're going to be talking about today is how that has changed over time. So the big difference that we're going to cover is the methods, the attack vectors, and the processes that all of the hacking that is happening today from a ransom perspective takes. So they have a kill chain now that is very, very different from what used to occur. It used to be that normally something comes through in an email, somebody gets one machine encrypted, whatever they have access to gets encrypted. Your IT team goes through, restores that data, or hopefully not, but pays the ransom if necessary to get that back if there was something wrong with the backups or something along those lines. What I'm trying to get across, especially during this, is that this impact to your business will not just be a week or a month. on average, it's going to take 4 months for an organization to fully recover from this. And when we say is your calendar free, that isn't just your IT team or whatever services are impacted. This is going to be your executive team having to field questions across the board, your PR team. Everybody is going to be engaged in this because you are essentially going to be a business that was up one day and down the next. And that is going to be what I'm going to try to show the ways that the bad actors get in, what they do, how they've changed their methodology. So they've gone a bit from a buckshot approach to a more targeted methodology. And as we go through this, you'll have a better understanding of what that means and how to mitigate it. So, like I was saying, it's no longer excuse me, a buckshot approach. They spend a lot of time looking before they go in and actually pull the trigger. So 390 hours is the average that we've found that hackers are doing their homework. This is an iconic scene from Ocean's 11. Nobody would get to see this if it wasn't in a movie. This is the type of planning that hackers doing. They may not be wearing slacks. They may be guys in their basement, but it's usually more than one. And they are usually very, very good at what they do. So once they have pulled the trigger, a lot of times what we found also is there's a 127-hour timer. And that is purely to isolate and contain the breach. That does not mean that you're up within 5 days. If those 390 hours that I referenced earlier were done well, then they will have crippled your infrastructure in such a way that you may not even be able to figure out how they got in. And that is something that I've run into is, as we go through this, you will see the ways that you mitigate and control your environment to stop people from getting in, but also know when they are there and be able to backtrack through your logs to contain and isolate the breach. So again, those 4 months we referenced earlier, coupled with these 5 days, you're talking about a significant amount of time in which you're not able to do business at a minimum, still trying to figure out what they have done, how they got in, and we're going to detail all of that through the process today. So every 39 seconds, someone is trying to break in. So this is a scene from Walking Dead. It is very similar. The zombies are always knocking at your door. They are trying to get in constantly. If any of you have ever talked to a network engineer or have been on a firewall, seen anything in the logs, you will know if you do not have it locked down and you just have public access to try to administer your firewall, there are constant attacks. They are not just from the US or China or any particular country. They are constant from around the world. People scan IPs. They're trying to get in, try to find your weaknesses. And that is really the first step, is trying to get into your network. But that isn't where it stops. And again, like I said previously, it used to be buckshot through email, exposed websites, malware, get in, ransom a single machine. It has changed dramatically. In my experiences, the businesses that I've been pulled into have been very, very different than that one machine on your network that got encrypted and the accounting share or their portion of the accounting share that they had access to got ransomed. So how do they execute this kill chain? So we're going to go through the various steps of what a hacker will do, or a group of hackers are going to try to do to get into your network, to make full exploitation of your environment and to get the most bang for their buck. As we said before, they're knocking on the door every 39 seconds. So they need to figure out ways to get into your network to start. So every network is vulnerable. What we will do in the future slides is tell you how you can start to mitigate those vulnerabilities. But there are 0 days that come out every day. So you might have somebody dedicated within the team, and they may not be like a direct team. It might be one guy purchases these scans and says, hey, I found a vulnerability on these IPs. It looks like these IPs are owned by this organization. And during that process, they will figure out if they're able to get in. So those vulnerabilities on the edges of your network, but also within your network, are what we're going to try to mitigate through these processes. So the main way of getting in is going to be the same thing that's been happening for a very long time. So I remember 20 plus years ago on AOL, people were phishing. If everybody remembers, there was within your IM screen, they would say, do not give out your personal information. Surprisingly, people still did it. And to this day, people still get caught not knowing when people are lying to them. So there are multiple ways to try to figure out how to get into a network. So again, there's usually finding the vulnerability as the first step. Then once they found the vulnerabilities, then they try to figure out how to get into your network with authentication of some sort. So people will sometimes publish all of their IT team and their executive team's information, including email addresses, on the web. For whatever reason, it's not always recommended, but it is a way that somebody could do what's called spear phishing, which is when you directly attack a specific person with detailed information, either cloning a domain to make it seem like somebody they know. I have seen people be sent wire transfer requests and had them executed by organizations because they didn't have the proper tools in place to stop that sort of attack and those sort of emails from coming into their system. So again, once they figured out what your vulnerabilities are, then they start figuring out how to get in. And that process continues once they're in your network. So again, those 390 hours, they go into the planning of how to get in, finding those vulnerabilities, getting access, getting authentication, even if it's just a basic user. It could be a receptionist that logs into Facebook with the same email and password that she uses in the corporate office. Then all of a sudden her Facebook account gets hacked for some reason, and then they have that password associated with a corporate email address. So again, once they're into your network, then they're going to start deep diving into what they can do when they're there. They're going to try to figure out where your backups are. And this, finding their data and finding the depth and crawling through your network, is the difference between the buckshot previous approach that we had seen for years to, over the past 5 years, it has become far more measured. They are dedicating time within your network. I've been brought into organizations where not only did they figure out where all of the key infrastructure was, they figured out what the organization was, how much they would work. They essentially will do market research on a business once they figure out what it is they got into. So the guy in the very first step just has an IP and a vulnerability. Maybe they can back into a business name by doing an IP lookup. But once they're in, they know your domain names, they can start looking at your data, then they really know what you're worth. And that's when they start figuring out what a ransom will look like. So obviously these are going to be government organizations that provide tolling or contractors of them. That's going to be a very big fish for them. They're going to want to do it. Now, do they do it out of clout? For the most part, not as much anymore. They're not doing the bragging that they would before. Once they're in your network and they're reviewing, finding all of your data, I've also seen an organization where they found an IT engineer's password file, which was just a text file on his machine that also detailed where the Amazon-based backups were. So they were able to not only get into the network, but get into their backups and their off-site backups also. So that's what they're trying to do, is figure out everything they can and figure out how to get the most bang for their buck. So they don't want to waste those 390 hours. They don't want to waste the money maybe that they put forward or that Bitcoin that they use to get the vulnerabilities from somebody else. So again, once they've gotten in, once they've figured out all of the ways to get through your network, what's important to you, they will do analysis as if they're an engineering team to figure out what's important to you. Once they're in, they're going to start figuring out how to get control. So there are external vulnerabilities and ways to penetrate a network. And then once you're inside a network, there are ways to take control of various aspects. So again, once you have one login, then you can start enumerating administrators, things like that. There's detailed ways to do this, but once they are in, then they will start getting administrative control over your backups, over your servers, your networking devices if possible, and then they will give themselves some sort of backdoor. It might even be something as simple as a team viewer in server on one of the servers within your environment, but they might have their own custom bots. Again, this is going to go to the telemetry we'll talk about in the further slides about how to protect yourself from this. So again, once they're in, they've identified what's important to you. And what I find very often as businesses always say, my data, no one cares about it. Nobody needs to know. I run XYZ organization and my data is only important to me and my customers. Nobody else is going to care about that. That might be true, but it's very valuable to you. And that's the thing. And that's why the encryption and the ransoming of it is important. But if while they're in there, they do find things like your password files from Active Directory, they will find emails, internal things. You know, we've seen this before where data is just sent out into the wild purely because they want people to know either maybe what's going on within an organization, or they want to discredit that organization. Sometimes they will ransom this information back to you. So there's two steps of it. They might encrypt your data and say, hey, if you want your data back, you need to decrypt it with this, give me money for that. There's also the opportunity for them to say, hey, I found all of this data of yours. Do you really want this getting out into the wild? Do you want your competitors to know your entire client list? Not that they should be doing that, but if it's available, there is a high probability that people will use that information against you. So it's not just necessarily stolen and then sold. It could be stolen and then ransomed back to you. And again, there's no guarantee that they will not just sell it again. You know, there is honor amongst the thieves, but they really could not care less about the communities and the organizations that they're going into. And then again, the very last step of this, once they've done all of that other work, they've gotten into your network, they've reviewed what's important to you, they've reviewed the way to have the most impact on your environment, they're going to encrypt your files and really take control of everything in your environment and take you to a screeching halt. And the way that I've been able to sell this idea to a lot of executives is that you will be in your environment for months, years, doing business as normal. Those bad actors, those hackers, are going to also spend time in your network before they pull the trigger. So just like Charlie Brown, he thinks he's going to have a ball to play with. When he goes to kick it, it's not there. And that is what I've seen with a lot of businesses. When I get pulled in, it is not a great feeling to go into an organization and they're like, all right, so what's the fix? What do we do? And I have to get to know the organization. They are not existing clients of us. We don't have documentation. I have to go in and discover everything about their network and their server infrastructure just to begin making a plan. One of the most recent ones, I spent 8-10 hours on site with their team. And at the end of the day, the only thing I could tell them to do was to turn everything off, and we had to start the next morning. There wasn't going to be an option to bring them back up. And telling that to the owner of a business is not something I want to do or ever like to do, but it is the correct answer. And in that particular instance, because the IT team didn't have any security processes, the early birds that went back into the office were getting complaints that people couldn't log into their computers. So they started bringing servers back up, even though they could not do their job. And again, I had to essentially tell them we need to turn it off and come up with a recovery plan. And all of that goes back to the 5 days or 127 hours of isolate and contain that happens before you can even start rebuilding your environment. So hopefully I've instilled enough fear in everybody that this isn't just random, and there is a very concerted effort against organizations these days. So we're going to be looking at what we refer to at Leapfrog, and many organizations do, as your operational maturity or your security operational level of maturity. So many of these organizations do very, very well. If you are, say, PCI certified, you will probably be up to at least the monitor level and doing some of the managed level. That is amazing, but there are areas that what exists today within the PCI requirements do fall a little short. When I go through, I am sometimes surprised when I get a PCI certification that certain things are allowed that I've seen within the certification process that really do need to be adjusted. So it's not just on the certification, it is on every business and every owner and every manager to be looking at these levels of maturity. So the first level, most organizations are here. Like I said, most organizations that I get pulled into are somewhere in this chaos protect level. I would say most organizations are at least at protect. They have some form of antivirus. They have some form of patching. They may or may not have an asset and software inventory. They may or may not have good access controls. They may have good physical security. Those are kind of basic things, but some people do believe that just doing these particular actions will solve all of your IT problems and you're protected. as we go through this, I'll be able to better explain why just having tools or just having a few tools will not really suffice to protect yourself against all of those other issues that the hackers are going to go through. They're going to go through their kill chain, and really you can protect only so much when you're at this level. So as you start to build up through these levels of security operational maturity, you see it really starts to expand. And you could even think this almost as a ladder where you have to take each step up as opposed to you're walking upstairs, because these all build on each other. Sans chaos, obviously that is just people not necessarily doing what they should be doing. Most, like I said, are doing at least protect. They do have some access control. If they get to the next level, then you're talking about segmentation and removing flat networks. And what that really means is, like I was saying about the kill chain, when they get into your network, if you essentially have all of your users, all of your servers, your backups, all on the same network without any controls in between, then you are really exposing yourself to them without any way to block between. So once they get in maybe to an external, a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, where most people have their external facing servers, if you have it properly locked down, they can only get further into your network on very, very specific ports. So that kind of segmentation begins at defend. It is not the end all of it, because once you move into contain, then you have, not only are you protecting it from a network perspective, you are also managing all of your applications to say default deny. If I don't know what it is, it cannot run. And then also the policy-based security zones. That goes back to segmentation. So not only is there segmentation, but they also have a policy wrapped around what is allowed to access what and why. And then lastly, device firewalls. That means something locally on your machine. I'm sure people are used to seeing their Windows firewall or something along those lines that can block connections to that machine itself. So you have your infrastructure level firewalls, your physical devices containing things between segments. Then you will have your individual machines firewall, which will also protect it by itself. Now, again, this is a great place to be, but if you really want to move to the next level, you need to be watching it. So a SOC is without a doubt the most important portion of this. And there is another level to this that the SOC is also engaged in, but we'll get to that in a moment. The crux of it is your SIEM, your security information and event management or monitoring. When you look at it, it sounds easy, but your correlation threads, the way you figure out what is happening in your network, that's where the monitoring comes in. Knowing what your vulnerabilities are. So having an active vulnerability management program where you're doing weekly scans, you have a team that is reviewing those vulnerabilities, your infrastructure team is executing any changes to mitigate it, or your application or your web team, your DBA team, they are all working towards this. And again, when you get to this monitor level, you are no longer set it and forget it, which is the biggest problem with most organizations, is they're at the protect level. They think they can just purchase antivirus, they can purchase a firewall. I go into a lot of organizations and I see they do have a firewall, but they do not have any intrusion detection. They don't have any web filtering. They essentially have a last gen firewall that can do some of the segmentations. They don't have what we refer to as a next gen firewall. The new firewalls provide UTM or unified threat management. There is no other way to operate in today's world without those types of firewalls. So again, between vulnerability management, next generation firewalls, one thing I want to really point out, especially for any of the leaders on this call, the 0-day threat detection is something that is very, very difficult. And this goes back to, it is a day-to-day process to manage your security. It's not something you do once a week or once a month or once a quarter. It has to be every day, because new vulnerabilities and new security threats come out every day. If you are engaged in your organization in any meaningful way for the infrastructure, if you have not been told that they need to take an emergency downtime to do a 0-day patch in the last, I'd say 6 to 12 months, it either isn't happening or you're not aware of it. And if it isn't happening, that is where your problems are, because we at Leapfrog find if we get alerts, we are on a lot of boards, message boards and notification streams that tell us, hey, this common piece of software that you guys run and probably run at multiple businesses does now have a 0-day threat. Our team, our SOC, immediately does a risk analysis, determines what the solution is, and we figure out exactly how fast we can resolve it. Certain breaches and certain fixes are not created equal. So there might be a vulnerability that is considered, say, a low or medium risk. Great, but the fix is going to take your environment down for 10 hours. Again, you need to do that analysis, and that needs to be a cooperative discussion between both your leadership teams and your SOC and your infrastructure team to figure out how to best fill those holes. So I can't stress enough that if you are not being told about 0 days, or you don't know if you have that kind of review going on, you probably don't. So that's going to lead again into anomaly and breach detection. So we discussed earlier about how long the hackers are in your environment. That 390 hours, some of it's spent externally, some of it's spent internally before they pull that trigger. Once they are there, though, you should have some sort of issue correlation within your environment. So like I said, the protect, defend, contain really is great, but until you are watching the data that your security systems are providing you, you really won't know. I've seen people with fantastic firewalls and good tools, but nobody was watching them. Nobody had any correlation or anomaly and breach detection. There wasn't any way to figure out what was happening in your network. One thing I've seen with organizations, they don't find out that their data is being exfiltrated until their circuit is pegged and somebody says, hey, the website's slow or the internet's slow. Then all of a sudden they go in and they see, oh, look at that, our circuit is pegged. Then they start backing into, well, why is it pegged? Why is that server sending a bunch of data? What's that IP on the other end? By that point, if you've been pegging your circuit for that long, they've gotten a large chunk of your information already. And there's really nothing to be done except for to stop it. And again, we go back to that 5 days of isolate and contain. That's when that process starts. If you don't have anomaly and breach detection, then you won't know until something collapses around you. If you do have it, you at least can get ahead of it and minimize your risk. So back to the threats and penetration testing, vulnerability management. These are great to do on the external and the internal. Many organizations only scan their outside of their network. When you really are at this level, you need to be scanning internally and externally. So like I said, especially today, we're going to go a little bit into it. I think we all are aware there's a lot of work from home going. As you can see behind me, I am on that list also. So with that said, we now are increasing our risk vectors, our attack vectors, because we are allowing devices into the network. So again, the vulnerability management and penetration testing, those things used to be just on the outside, because the thought was if you stop them from getting in, then they can't take advantage. What we found is there are many ways in. So we saw the phishing, we saw, USB drives, various methodologies can get you into a network. And then once you are in, you can really start to take advantage of the internal vulnerabilities, which are sometimes left to the wayside by IT organizations for various reasons. So again, depending on the size of your organization, a 24/7 SOC that you staff yourself may not be an option. There are some fantastic third parties that you can provide. Leapfrog does provide this also. I would recommend, if you do not have a 24/7 SOC in some form or fashion, you start and begin to research that, because you will not be able to stop this without a proper system in place. And that's when we're going to get to the managed portion of it. So again, a 24/7 SOC is great, but it really goes back to a security-driven life cycle. So everything needs to be reviewed. All of your infrastructure needs to be reviewed. So all the vulnerability scanning, your penetration testing, your 0-day threats, you need to be watching that on a day-to-day basis. When you really get to management, you're talking about incident management or security incident management. When you see things occur, so the automated threat responses, this is a fully managed automated system that will contain things as they come up. You still need to be watching it every day. But when you have these incident response plans, everybody knows what to do in the case of an incident. So that kind of goes back to what I was referring to, that organization. They were bringing servers up because they didn't know what else to do. They didn't have a plan. They didn't know how to notify their clients that there had been a breach. They didn't have a protocol or a system to notify people, or a policy to say, should we or should we not, like what data was lost. And again, without the proper logging and controls, they couldn't even say what data had been lost. They just knew that they had been encrypted, their backups had been encrypted. It was horrific. When you get to this managed level, you have those policies defined. You are testing your security incident response plan at least once a year. You are doing risk analysis on every vulnerability that pops up. Now, again, it does sound like a lot, but when you really get to the meat of these vulnerabilities, you can very quickly, with a good SOC and a good process, a good managed process, figure out exactly what to do in every scenario. You need to have business people and IT people and security minded folks in the same room talking about what your risk is. So a lot of people will have a risk analysis. Some people will have a risk register where they have all of the issues that they've found. They figured out what their level of risk is and what their solution is and what their timeline is. And they track all of that. We do that at Leapfrog. It is not necessarily required by any particular compliance organization. It is purely how we do business, is to try to be at that top tier, because we cannot tell our clients, you need to have this high level of operational maturity, if we can't show that we do it for ourselves. All of this to say, if you do those steps, I still can't guarantee that somebody won't be able to exploit a 0-day, that there won't be something else that gets into your network. But with the proper segmentation, the proper controls, the proper access management, if you're doing everything correctly and you're watching it, you will go from a high impact to a medium or low impact. You might lose a server, but at that point, it could have been a lot worse. If one server gets compromised, but they can't get to the rest of your network, they can't get to your backups, you restore that server and you're down for 2 hours, nobody's going to be very upset. Compared to what we now know after this discussion is that you could be down for 5 days. You could be working towards a proper solution for months. It could ruin organizations. And this slide really details it. The average breach is 1.42 million at this time. I think it's rapidly increasing personally. I have seen much higher levels of loss at organizations because of this. So when you start to think about, hey, is it worth all this money to have a SOC staff, to get all this new technology, to pay people to watch it? When you look at a number like that, you could pay a lot of people a lot of yearly salary to not have this issue. And I don't think we're going to be in a situation anytime soon where this risk is decreasing. I actually would say with the current, shelter in place rules and everything, the risk is even higher. We're going to go into that a little bit in a moment. But again, when we say 1.42 million and 15% lower profits 3 years later, that is very apparent from the organizations that I've worked with. Once somebody comes into your network, they take down your web server, they take down your database, you're down for a week, they want to do business. They're going to call somebody else that can do the same thing as you. That is the risk that we all run, and I've seen it across organizations. It very much is an issue, and the cost is very high. There's an old adage that backups are expensive until you need them. You'd have paid anything you could to get your backups when your server's dead. So a lot of people will try to skimp out on backups or with security. When you really look at the cost benefit analysis of doing good security, of having these properly maintained environments, it far outweighs it from a risk perspective. So like I was saying with risk, I think we're all aware, most of us, I'm sure, are in our homes or should be. BYOD, bring your own device in remote workforces. I've designed dozens of BCDR plans for organizations. Not once did I consider the fact that people couldn't be within 6 feet of each other as a problem. Most of the time you say, I've got my primary data center, I've got my secondary data center, and I've got a call center, and then I've got a secondary call center. I've got a provider that can spin me up machines, and I can get people over there, get a network set up within a day or two. Very, very simple. When you start doing this, everybody has to be at home. Maybe they can't bring their work machines home. That means that someone is going to bring their machine onto your network through a VPN or some other method to get to do their job. But that could be the same laptop that the teenage son was using a day before and had went to some website, just clicked the wrong link or had an email on his personal email. You lose all of your protections, all of your telemetry, everything is gone when you start allowing machines into your network that you cannot verify. So you are increasing that attack vector. So when we said 39 seconds for every attack, when you start bringing in these devices, you are essentially inviting in issues because you don't have control over them. And again, I can't fault organizations. They got to keep doing business, but it is a huge problem right now. And I feel as though when we talk about 39 seconds and the amount of attacks that are occurring, I think it's going to ramp up. All of these hackers all work from home all the time. I joked about it just being a guy with sweatpants in his basement, but he is in his house or he's at a coffee shop. These guys don't have an office to go to. They coordinate over the internet using secure tools, dark web resources. They don't care about what's going on right now in the world. It's of no concern to them if they can either get into a network, get some data, get more clout, figure out exactly what's going on, and exploit what I believe is a whole new set of risk factors for every organization. And I thought it was important to include this because there is a lot of that happening right now and a lot of people using personal machines and understanding the risk that you're bringing into the organization. So like I said, that risk register, when you start opening up external access to unmanaged machines, you have a risk that you need to analyze and you need to figure out what the right methodology to at least limit that is. Is it with more segmentation on your VPN? Is it with a different process so that you don't actually let those devices on your network? So I think right now there's a huge push, and there will be continue to be a new BCDR methodology out in the world, including like all business continuity, including remote workforces. I think it has really changed the game for the world when it comes to the risk and what working means for a lot of people. So that said, that's my presentation. I hope it was very informative.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. It's a very good presentation. We do appreciate your time. Before we get to the questions and answers, what I would like to do is introduce Leapfrog's CTO, Emmett Hawkins. He's available to answer some questions as well. We have about 15 minutes left for questions and answers, and right now I have a couple of them, which I'll ask you and give you a couple of minutes to get your thoughts together. You know, a lot of the agencies and authority that are on the phone right now and their consultants, you know, in the RFPs, we are required to do PCI compliant or the systems to be PCI compliance and have those audits done, SOX, those kind of things. But I'm wondering, have you done any type of analysis that kind of says what's the gap between if you say your system is PCI compliant and say this is a robust cybersecurity program? I mean, how much of a gap are still left to be done on these types of systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So the controls that I've seen, there's one glaring control that I've always seen, which is around wireless. So I've seen organizations that go a step further than just saying, hey, I scanned to look for any open wireless access points. The requirement really can be fulfilled by having somebody wander around your locations with a laptop, making sure that all of the wireless that they see in the organization and the speeds once a quarter fills that gap. In my opinion, that means that there is 90 days that a piece of equipment could be transmitting wireless in your organization or in a building, exfiltrating data, and you will have absolutely no idea. So it's very intricate details about what the controls are. And I think as time goes on, they're going to get locked down further and further. But there's a few examples about what is required from a connectivity standpoint, how things get, say, infected with PCI from one level to another, what really constitutes connectivity between those. There's a lot of, I would say that it's not necessarily vague, but there's a lot of interpretation in the ways that a QSA can approach it. So if you're very network-centric QSA, they can really deep dive in your network. If you have a risk-based QSA, they may not get too deep into the network and could get the wool pulled over their eyes by maybe not the best IT team. So you have to be careful of what's best for each requirement and looking at your risks. So I'd say that'd be the crux for me, is that there are multiple. The wireless one to me was the glaring hole.
Yeah, yeah. Emmett, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You're on mute.
You're muted.
In general, compliance-based controls are lagging security posture. So I would encourage organizations to not stop at just meeting the actual PCI requirements. A lot of the newer technology that's out around automated threat response and integrated threat intelligence is not a PCI requirement. However, the hackers are automating their ways to attack you. The only ways we can keep up with them if we automate our ways to defend ourselves as well. So don't feel like you can just stop once you get to compliant.
Okay. Now, you mentioned something throughout your presentation that a question came up, piqued my interest as well as others. You mentioned that there is sometimes a latency between a ransomware resolution because you're coming in or a company like Leapfrog is coming in to this organization without any real background within it. What are some considerations that companies, agencies, authorities can do to kind of shorten that, time frame, that latency, like better documentation or some sort of, retaining experts like yourself? Just what do you think, Joe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say the most recent event that I was a part of that I am still remediating. So when I said the 4 months, it is still ongoing. When I went in, I could not get a updated network diagram. I couldn't get an application flow. I had to sit down and whiteboard out priorities of everything. They didn't have proper logging on their firewall. So once the attack happened, a certain amount of time had passed, those logs had rolled over. If you have good documentation, good logging, it's very, very easy for me to then to kind of backfill. I can even engage our SOC to start doing a threat analysis on those logs to take a look at what bad actors may have come in. I would say logging and documentation are probably the biggest one that would help me when I go in. So why do you have a port open? A lot of these are PCI controls of, hey, if I look at your firewall and I see all of these settings, can you tell me either off the top of your head or from a document why it's open, who can access it, and what controls are in place to stop that access from filtering through the rest of your network? So I think documentation and good logging on your devices is paramount for us to figure out how something occurred, because the biggest problem is we go into an environment, they don't have that logging, and they keep on asking, well, how did this happen? Where did it come from? You don't have the information. I can't make it up. So
Good. Another question has come in. There are many customer service centers in the toll industry that handle customer accounts, license plate images, financial transactions, PII, all the important stuff. Are there unique characteristics of these centers that we need to protect against?
I would say that the biggest concern I always have with tolling in general, with the call centers and whatnot, the level of employee usually that you're bringing in may not be the highest to be in those call centers. So properly managing all of those environments and making sure you have good physical controls and good ways to monitor what people are doing. The other big problem that I find, or at least it comes to me immediately, is that you may not be the most liked organization in your state. You may actually be the least liked organization because you are charging people to, say, drive to work. So you can be a huge attack vector for them. But generally speaking, call centers and tolling centers, you guys have a very similar issue than any organization does. You have the same technology problems, the same risk vectors. I would say only because of your visibility is there a huge difference between the tolling industry and any other organization, is that you probably would be a bigger target for them.
Okay, the next question, maybe I'll shoot this one to Emmett. Seems that from Wanda, everyone seems to be using Zoom and Google Meet despite all the privacy and data breach issues that over the media. What do you make of these? Is a fear warranted?
Ooh, I think it is. I mean, you have to assume that people could be eavesdropping on meetings, whereas they would have had to have breached your physical security in years past. But I will say I'll take that with a grain of salt. The majority of what I see happening with these Zoom meetings is interruption, is disruption, rather than actual exfiltration of information to be harnessed for monetary gain. I think it might get there, but right now there's a huge impetus to further secure these messaging platforms. I think there'll be a bit of a shakeout here. I think the industry was focused on growth for the last few years, and web conferencing was something that people did occasionally. Now that it has become mainstream and people are having board meetings and making big decisions and discussing very private things over these conferences, the security levels have to increase.
So we've got two questions, I think, on that are very similar. One from Swentha, one from Pat, related to, and you talked a little bit about this on your slide for BYOD, bring your own device. You know, now everyone's working from home. A lot of times it's either a company device, but a lot of times it's not. It's their personal device. You know, now connecting to a corporate network. Maybe you can explain a little bit more some of the additional security that may need to be put in place or should be put in place, and other considerations that companies and authorities and agencies should be taking.
Yeah, absolutely. So one main thing that most organizations can do is, let's say you connect to a VPN. If you are not having to validate that your machine has all of its Windows patching, that it has active up-to-date antivirus, that it does have a Windows firewall enabled. So there is a compliance check that it can occur with a lot of the new VPN systems that will provide kind of a better understanding of what is going on that machine. So you can put very granular things that say, has your antivirus run a full scan? Is it fully up to date? Are you patched? All of those things are great. You could also make a requirement or a policy that you have to have some sort of corporate endpoint management tool that provides all of that and reports that back to the firewall. Another great option to get the, sorry.
MFA and those kind of things.
Oh yeah, no, if you're not already doing MFA, that should, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
You should definitely be doing a token for all of your remote access. Sorry, left that one behind. I would say the greatest way to keep them off of your network is to do something like VDI, a virtual desktop infrastructure. So then you connect to a portal. Again, you multi-factor into that. Then you get a dedicated desktop that is controlled by the organization. So you can do that with a hosting service. There's a lot of different options to keep that secure. I would say the minimum is know what devices are getting onto your network. Ensure that you have the telemetry over those devices. Either that or lock them down so tightly until you can get those controls in place. So a lot of organizations have just opened their VPN to a lot of users they wouldn't have and a lot of machines they wouldn't have previously. You can ask your networking team to create a very dedicated DMZ for those users.
Got a very technical question coming in from Benton. I'll leave it up to whoever wants to take this one, Emmett or Joe. What's your thoughts on split tunneling? Maybe you want to explain what that is for some of us on the phone, and then
sure,
what are your thoughts?
I've done the lion's share talking. I'll let you go.
All right. So split tunneling is the idea that you can route some of your traffic through your VPN traffic that is essentially destined for your business's location. However, you can allow internet traffic and other traffic that's destined for other websites to go straight from the internet connection that you're from. This is a default configuration for organizations who don't have regulatory compliance requirements. So it saves bandwidth and makes your network more available for your users who use it. there is a lot of discussion that's going on right now about whether or not that should be changed so that you have visibility to what your employees are doing all day when they're working remotely. So to route all that traffic
Mhm.
through the business network in order to use your next generation firewalls, if you have them, to do web content filtering and to track whether or not these machines are compromised. I think that there's probably a middle ground to that technology. There are ways to extend sort of endpoint management visibility out to the endpoints without having to route all that traffic back through the corporate environment. I think that doing so not only stresses the bandwidth constraints for the business, but also increases the risk vectors. There's no guarantee that the botnets that are on these computers that are infected know what's on your, knows what's inside your network. So when they're out there scanning, split tunneling actually gives you the ability to make sure that they're not necessarily scanning your corporate network. But if you are hard tunneled all traffic coming back to corporate, any type of reconnaissance that's happening on an infected machine is happening on the inside of your environment. And
Mm,
I'm not sure that's something that you want.
mm. Good, thanks. Quick question, Joe, on where did you find the stats? Maybe you can give us where folks can find those stats related to, the 39 seconds, attacks happening every 39 seconds, or attempts are happening every 39 seconds, in the 5-day window, profit loss. I mean, we could post that later in
Yeah.
IBTTA, but Emmett, you.
Yeah, yep. I'll give you that one. So Verizon actually does an incredible job of collecting forensic data across the year. And so every year, about this time of year, it's usually in April, they put out a cyber risk report. So the stats that you saw early on in the presentation were from the 2019 version um, that came out last year around this time of statistics. So I think it's maybe 100 pages of statistics that chronicle everything from the types of bad actors to frequency and
Mhm.
industries targeted. So if you want some sleepy time reading, feel free to download it and peruse.
I think we got another question coming from Richard here, and I think it's a great question, not only because he's my boss, but I think it's a good question. As a a lot of managers find themselves relying on their IT experts, their IT team, to provide them, the information and basically provide, in some cases the yay and nay that, hey, we're secure, right? But let's say from a non-network engineering or IT expert, what can some managers and leaders really question, their teams to give them a, better comfort level that they are, doing all the right things? I mean, what are some of the things to ask, some of the things to consider? Maybe there's some resources they could, the team, managers can go to kind of, you know, help question their IT team.
Yeah, so the very intense version of that would be to get yourself a risk assessment, a security assessment by a certified firm. You can
You're
trust
saying
all.
outside of the
You can get an
organization.
out. You can get a third party to do a proper risk assessment. It gets very difficult because if they are doing a good job, then their answers aren't going to be easy to absorb. Not that you can't ask them, but
Mhm.
again, you can ask them things from these slides, and I think we're going to post them. You can ask, say, what is our process for 0-day threat protection? What is our security incident response plan? When was the last time it tested? What were the scenarios we went through during that? What do we have that would stop it from happening? So you can kind of look at very high level issues that have happened around the world. Ransomware is a big one. Data exfiltration is a huge one. People stealing PII is very common. I like in the toll industry, I think that's probably one of your biggest concerns if you are not directly PCI compliant. I would say that is the best you can do is really to ask those pressing questions and have them show you how they do it and how they log those tickets. So one thing that we have a lot of is recurring tickets that you can review quarterly. So we do a quarterly review of all of our security incidents and our security program. So that's run by a CISO, and then he refers to the SOC. So there's usually layers. There's usually an executive over the team. I would also recommend making sure that you have somebody that you trust within your, VP team, your executive team, maybe just below in the directors, that you trust to make those analysis. Because knowing everything that I know after almost 20 years in IT is not something that's going to be very easy to absorb. But if you ask those pressing questions, ask how you tested, what methodologies they use, you can usually figure that out. A lot of the processes within PCI are really good, and if you're doing them, then you just need to make sure that people are really providing good value, because you can just check a box and say we did a security review, and it is what it is. But if your SOC is watching things, look for the 0-day, look for your vulnerability management program, your penetration testing. You want those reports. They should be able to provide you at least quarterly some sort of detail about what they've done, what they've improved. So they may have great tools, and if they really do have the right processes, that's the other half of that. That's the other dovetail.
Okay, great, thanks. One last question here. A lot of the folks on the phone, agencies, authorities, consultants, are working, the way the industry is moving is to really start expanding the ecosystem of the services or products that currently have in place, adding mobility as a service partners, adding IoT devices, connected vehicles are coming down the pipe. Social media is becoming more and more connected to either back office systems or other information systems within the agencies or authorities. Quickly, what are some of the considerations, and not necessarily a ransomware type question, but an overall security question, that we can have folks start to think about?
Yeah, I would say it is very similar, but when you talk about, IoT, any devices that are being integrated, it is all about that segmentation we talked about before, that application control, knowing what was getting into your network, why it's getting in. Again, you can't stop everything, but all of those steps from vulnerability management, penetration testing, making sure you're utilizing certified services. So there are a lot of these things that you can find that are already certified, and they provide you their reports. If you can't get that, then you have to ingest them into your existing security program. So if you have, say, an HVAC system that's going to be on your network, then you need to be scanning that. You need to have a process that you escalate that to the HVAC team, or to your facilities team, and they handle it. So I didn't quite mention it, but security is for everyone. It's not just your IT team. Everybody has to be educated. We didn't quite get into end user training, things like that. Everybody needs to be engaged in your security program, not just your app dev and DBA and IT team. Your executives need to understand it. I see executives get owned more because they feel as though they're either not a target or they don't need to have that education. And everything is a target. And I would say you treat everything with least access and work your way out from there with the vulnerability and penetration testing.
Okay. Emmett, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say from a architecture perspective, when you're working with your applications team, to think ahead and define a communication protocol that you're going to force all of this other traffic through. So you create one set of APIs that you're going to allow this interaction to happen with. That way you can set up good anomaly detection and monitoring of the connections to those APIs, and don't allow straight back-end connections into your network. Force all of that connectivity through an approved API. You have code review on that. You have security review on that. You limit the exposure to just that one vector, so that you don't create a sprawl. I see a lot of times when there's a lot of new IoT, they let the devices drive the strategy, and not a lot of time has been put into securing how they're going to work inside the environment. They're like, well, if you just open up this port, my device will work, right? And people get driven by wanting the device rather than wanting the security. So if your application team can get out ahead of it and define, we're only going to use these REST APIs and we're only going to do it in this way, and then you force all of your IoT to conform to that connection model, I think you'll have a lot more success.
Okay, great. Well, first I want to just thank Joe, Emmett, Leapfrog for giving us, you two guys, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I also want to thank Wanda and Cheryl and Christian for pulling this together. A lot of work went into getting this scheduled and set up. And of course, everybody who joined the webinar, I hope you found it very informative. Please take the survey to let us know, give us your feedback. And we're going to let you go for today. I do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Mhm.